Elena Graves, lead architect for 17 years, was fired as obsolete. What her CEO didn't know was that every system, server, and integration she had built was intertwined with her expertise. Within hours, minor glitches escalated into operational chaos, client delays, and financial errors. Watching from a distance, Elena quietly orchestrated her revenge, proving that experience and foresight are irreplaceable, and sometimes, the most satisfying corporate justice comes from letting karma unfold perfectly. I still remember the day it happened, the day Elena Graves, the lead architect who had spent 17 years building the company's technology infrastructure from the ground up, was called into the CEO's office and told, in the most condescending tone imaginable, that I was now obsolete, that my experience was outdated, and that my role was no longer needed, and as I sat there across from him, the smug smirk on his face, trying to digest the absurdity of 17 years of loyalty and brilliance being dismissed with a few words, I couldn't stop myself from laughing quietly, because I knew the truth. While he thought he was exercising authority, he had just made the biggest mistake of his career, the kind of mistake that, if handled correctly, could cripple the very company he believed he controlled, and I immediately began to plan, mentally noting every system I had designed, every server, every piece of software, every client-facing tool, every integration, every automated process, every subtle failsafe that only I fully understood, because over 17 years, I had been the invisible backbone of every successful launch, every seamless operation, every client retention. And now the man sitting across from me had decided to pull the plug on the person who had built it all, and that arrogance, that ignorance, would become the stage for my revenge, because Elena Graves doesn't just leave quietly, Elena Graves leaves strategically, and the beauty of it was that he had already given me the perfect opportunity to expose how dependent the company was on me, and within the next 24 hours, I executed a series of moves that would quietly, methodically, and invisibly demonstrate the chaos that ensues when you underestimate the person who has done the heavy lifting, and it began with subtle access control changes, alerts, and automated scripts that I had embedded years ago as part of system upgrades, small, seemingly innocuous adjustments that would only be noticed under the right conditions, and when he and the IT team started trying to override these controls, the system began to behave unpredictably, with delayed processing, failed integrations, and minor but critical errors. And as I walked out of the building for what I was supposed to think was my last day, I knew the dominoes were already tipping, and the realization that 17 years of expertise cannot be replaced by a title, a corner office, or a fresh-faced innovation hire was about to dawn on them, and the first signs appeared almost immediately, clients calling in confusion about project deliverables, internal teams scrambling to find explanations for automated system failures, and executives who had once ignored my emails suddenly reaching out frantically for guidance, and of course, all the while, I was quietly documenting everything, screenshots, logs, timestamps, and emails, building the narrative of exactly what happened and why the company was faltering, all without lifting a finger to confront anyone directly, because real revenge is invisible, patient, and inevitable, and as the hours ticked by, I could see Darren, the CEO, pacing in his office, desperately calling meetings, trying to assign blame, none of which was recognized immediately as the very systems he had trusted to function flawlessly were now producing the results of 17 years of careful design operating in a state of observation mode, with me as the trigger, and each misstep, each error, each frustrated email sent by the board members and clients, only reinforced the fact that he had made a catastrophic error in judgment, thinking that dismissing the person who had built the backbone of the company would have no consequences, and as the day continued, the minor glitches began cascading into larger, more disruptive failures, automated reports misaligning, code repositories failing to update correctly, integration pipelines halting mid-operation, all while Darren tried desperately to regain control, unaware that the very architecture of the system had been designed to require the expertise only I possessed, and the irony was delicious, because he had imagined that my departure would give him more power, when in reality, it exposed his complete lack of understanding and dependence on the systems I had nurtured and maintained for nearly 2 decades, and I took a quiet satisfaction in the fact that, as the employees struggled to compensate for missing oversight, whispers of my absence circulated through the company, and even those who had been dismissive of me began to realize just how critical my knowledge and judgment had been, and then came the pinnacle moment of poetic justice, when an automated financial report that I had quietly monitored and adjusted over the years triggered a series of errors that cost the company a substantial sum, contracts miscalculated, client invoices delayed, and internal budgets temporarily misaligned, and Darren, The CEO who had so arrogantly called me obsolete had no idea how to resolve it, no idea how fragile the operations were without my guidance, and every frantic phone call he made, every directive he issued, only compounded the chaos. Proving exactly how dependent the company had been on the architect he had discarded, and as I sipped coffee from my car outside the building, quietly observing the storm I had initiated by simply allowing the systems to run in normal mode without my immediate oversight, I smiled at the elegance of the situation, because this wasn't messy, it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't angry, it was precise, calculated, and completely inevitable, and over the next 48 hours, as errors compounded, clients questioned timelines, team leads requested my guidance via email, and Darren's increasingly desperate attempts to regain control failed at every turn. The board began to take notice, questions were raised in meetings, and subtle doubt crept into the minds of those who had once blindly trusted his judgment, all while I remained at a distance, invisible but omnipresent, and the realization slowly dawned on everyone: Elena Graves, the so-called obsolete lead architect, was the glue holding the company together, and removing me had exposed just how fragile everything had been under the surface. And the final moment of satisfaction came when the board requested an emergency briefing, asking for a full report on operational failures, and I provided a detailed, documented account, perfectly highlighting the cause-effect relationship of every error, every glitch, every misstep, all traceable to the absence of my oversight. And by the time Darren tried to claim ignorance or blame others, the documentation spoke for itself, showing clearly that his decision to fire me had triggered a chain reaction that crippled key operations, and clients began pausing projects, vendors hesitated to proceed, internal teams worked overtime trying to compensate, and the company's credibility was visibly shaken. And all of this was completely avoidable had he recognized that experience, foresight, and institutional knowledge cannot be dismissed lightly. And as I closed my laptop that evening, reflecting on the orchestration, I couldn't help but chuckle, because this was the ultimate lesson in hubris. The CEO who thought he was asserting authority had instead exposed his own incompetence, and Elena Graves had quietly, invisibly, and brilliantly demonstrated that sometimes, the most effective revenge isn't confrontation, it's letting the systems you built, the structures you created, and the knowledge you hold unfold naturally, revealing the truth in the most undeniable and satisfying way. And as I walked away from the office, my resignation complete, my legacy intact, and my revenge executed flawlessly, I realized that 17 years of dedication had culminated in this perfect, poetic lesson, showing the entire company that experience is invaluable, expertise is irreplaceable, and arrogance in the face of knowledge is always, inevitably, punished.